It was a bitter December evening in Manchester, Vermont. The town, nestled between rolling hills blanketed with snow, was alive with the bustle of Christmas preparations. The town square, at the heart of the community, shone with twinkling lights, carolers sang near the gazebo, and families wandered through the festive holiday market. At the center of it all stood the town's Christmas tree, a grand, towering pine that every year drew locals and visitors alike to marvel at its splendor. But as the town prepared for yet another Merry Christmas, there was a quiet presence near the tree that had become a strange tradition in itself. A stray cat, a scruffy orange tabby with patches of missing fur and striking green eyes, had been seen sitting by the base of the tree every year, without fail, for the past 8 years. Nobody knew where he came from or why he returned to the same spot year after year. Some locals had even given him a name, Marmalade. At first, people thought Marmalade was just another stray looking for scraps of food. But as the years passed, the cat's unwavering devotion to the tree sparked curiosity, and eventually, rumors. Why did he come back every year? What was he waiting for? Some said he must have belonged to a family that had left him behind. Others whispered that he was a ghostly figure, guarding the tree for reasons only he understood. The truth was, Marmalade's story was deeply tied to the lives of 2 people in the town. Beth Carter, a widowed kindergarten teacher in her early 50s, was one of them. Known for her kindness and warm heart, Beth had always loved Christmas, but in recent years, she'd stopped decorating her home and had begun avoiding the holiday festivities. The season, which once brought her joy, now served as a painful reminder of loss. On the other hand, there was Caleb Morris, a retired carpenter in his late 60s. Caleb was a quiet, reserved man with a weathered face and a limp from an old injury. He lived alone in a modest cabin on the edge of town, spending most of his time crafting small wooden toys he donated to the Children's Hospital every Christmas. Caleb was a man of few words, but those who knew him could tell he carried a burden that weighed heavily on his heart. Neither Beth nor Caleb had crossed paths with Marmalade directly, though both had heard of the mysterious Christmas cat. Little did they know that this unassuming tabby held a secret that would bring them face to face and change their lives forever. That year, the weather was harsher than usual, with heavy snowstorms blanketing the town. Marmalade, as always, had appeared in early December and taken his place by the tree. He curled up at its base, unbothered by the bustling crowds or the biting cold. Some townspeople tried to coax him into their homes, but he always refused, slipping away into the shadows only to return to his spot by dawn. Beth, on her way home from school one afternoon, noticed the cat huddled by the tree. She paused, a pang of guilt tugging at her heart. The sight of the animal, so small and vulnerable against the vast winter landscape, reminded her of something or someone she couldn't quite place. Her hand absent-mindedly reached for the scarf around her neck, a faded red scarf that held memories of another life, another Christmas long ago. She shook her head and hurried home, trying to push the image of the cat from her mind. Meanwhile, Caleb watched Marmalade from a distance, standing in the shadow of the hardware store. There was something about the cat's stillness, his quiet presence, that stirred an ache deep within him. Caleb had always been a man of action, someone who fixed things with his hands. Yet here was something he couldn't fix, a mystery he couldn't solve. With a sigh, he turned and limped back to his cabin, the sound of snow crunching beneath his boots. As the days passed and Christmas drew closer, Marmalade remained by the tree, his green eyes reflecting the twinkling lights above him. For some, he was a symbol of resilience, a quiet reminder that even in the coldest winters, life perseveres. For others, he was an enigma, a puzzle they couldn't piece together. But for Beth and Caleb, Marmalade was more than just a stray cat. He was the key to a story they had both tried to forget, a story of love, loss, and a promise made under the glow of that very Christmas tree many years ago. It was on Christmas Eve, under a sky heavy with stars, that the truth about Marmalade began to unfold. And when it did, it would bring the entire town to tears. The air in Manchester, Vermont, grew colder as Christmas approached, the snow piling high against fences and windowsills. The town was bustling with holiday spirit, yet for Beth Carter and Caleb Morris, the season carried an undercurrent of sorrow neither could shake. Meanwhile, Marmalade continued his silent vigil beneath the Christmas tree, oblivious to the whispers and curious stares of the townsfolk. Beth spent Christmas Eve alone in her small, cluttered house, her hands trembling as she placed a single ornament on a tabletop tree, an old, worn angel made of felt and glitter. It was the only decoration she'd bothered to put up this year, a token she couldn't bear to part with. As she sat by the window, gazing out at the snow-covered street, her mind drifted back to a time when Christmas had meant something different. It had been over a decade since her world had unraveled. Beth and her late husband, Jack, had been inseparable, a team, partners in everything. They had dreamed of starting a family, and one Christmas that dream had almost come true. A little boy, about 4 years old, had come into their lives through a foster care program. His name was Adam, and from the moment he walked through the door, Beth had felt an unshakable bond. For a year, they had been a family. Adam was a quiet, introspective child who loved animals, especially cats. He would sit for hours sketching pictures of them, filling page after page with their wide eyes and soft fur. But their time together was cut short when Adam's biological mother unexpectedly regained custody. Beth and Jack were devastated, and though they tried to stay hopeful, the loss was a wound that never fully healed. When Jack passed away a few years later, Beth's grief became a permanent shadow, and she withdrew from the world. On the other side of town, Caleb sat alone in his cabin, the glow of a fire flickering in the hearth. He was carving a wooden train set, his hands steady despite the deep creases etched into his face. The smell of pine shavings filled the air, but Caleb wasn't thinking about the toy in his hands. His mind was back in a different December nearly 20 years ago. Back then, Caleb had been a younger man, still learning to navigate life after losing his wife in a car accident. One cold winter's day, he had been driving through a snowstorm when he spotted something moving along the side of the road. A flash of orange against the white. It was a cat, shivering and half-starved, its green eyes wide with fear. Caleb had pulled over and scooped the animal into his truck, taking him home and nursing him back to health. He named the cat Marmalade, and for years, they were inseparable. Marmalade became Caleb's closest companion, a source of comfort during the darkest days. But one Christmas Eve, Marmalade slipped out of the house and didn't return. Caleb searched everywhere, leaving food on the porch and calling his name into the woods, but the cat was gone. It was as if Marmalade had vanished into thin air, leaving Caleb with yet another emptiness he didn't know how to fill. And now, after all these years, Caleb couldn't help but wonder, could the scruffy tabby by the Christmas tree be his Marmalade? The thought seemed impossible, yet the resemblance was uncanny. The same orange fur, the same green eyes. But why would the cat return here of all places? What was keeping him tied to this town, this tree? On Christmas Eve, as the clock struck 9, Beth found herself standing in the town square, bundled against the cold. She had intended to stay home, but something had pulled her outside, a restlessness she couldn't ignore. She walked toward the Christmas tree, the sound of her boots crunching in the snow breaking the stillness of the night. And there he was, Marmalade, sitting at the base of the tree, his fur dusted with snow. Beth paused, her breath catching in her throat. There was something hauntingly familiar about the cat, though she couldn't quite place it. She crouched down, extending a gloved hand. "Hey there, buddy," she murmured, her voice soft. Marmalade didn't move, but his eyes met hers, unblinking. Across the square, Caleb had also ventured out, drawn by the pull of the holiday lights and the memories they evoked. When he saw Beth kneeling by the tree, his heart skipped a beat. He recognized her from around town but had never spoken to her. Still, there was something about the way she looked at the cat that gave him pause, a sadness he understood all too well. As Caleb approached, Beth glanced up, startled. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Caleb broke the silence. "Is he yours?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. Beth shook her head. "No, but he's been here every Christmas, hasn't he?" Caleb nodded, his gaze shifting to the cat. I think he might be mine. From a long time ago, Beth's brow furrowed. Yours? Caleb hesitated, then told her the story of how he'd found Marmalade all those years ago, how the cat had been his companion until the fateful Christmas Eve when he disappeared. As he spoke, Beth felt a strange sense of déjà vu, as if she'd heard this story before. Then it hit her. Her Adam. He had drawn dozens of pictures of a cat just like this one. A cat he said had lived with him before he came to her and Jack. Marmalade had been Adam's, too. Tears welled in Beth's eyes as she pieced it together. Marmalade had connected them all. Adam, Caleb, and herself, without them even realizing it. But what did it mean? Why had the cat returned to this tree year after year? The answer, it seemed, was just beginning to reveal itself. The Christmas Eve air hung heavy with mystery and unspoken emotion. Beth and Caleb stood together in the glow of the tree's twinkling lights, the cat that tied their lives together sitting between them, motionless except for the soft rise and fall of his breathing. Neither of them fully understood what was happening, but they could feel it. A pull, a connection, as if the answers they sought were just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. Marmalade, Beth whispered, her voice trembling as her gloved hand reached out to the cat's soft fur. He was Adam's. My Adam. Adam? Caleb asked, frowning in confusion. Beth swallowed hard, the memories flooding back. He was my foster son years ago. He was only with us for a short time, but he loved this cat. He used to draw pictures of him constantly, even after Marmalade was gone. He said he belonged to someone before him, someone who loved him just as much. Caleb's lips parted slightly, his mind racing. He looked down at the cat, at the same green eyes he had looked into so many years ago. Could it be possible? Could this stray, this quiet, loyal animal have been searching for someone or something all along? For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the Christmas lights and the distant echo of carolers' voices. Then, as if sensing their shared hesitation, Marmalade stood up. He stretched, his movements slow and deliberate, and then began to walk. Not away from them, but toward the edge of the square, his tail high in the air. Beth and Caleb exchanged a glance. Is he leading us somewhere? Caleb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Beth nodded. I think he is. Without another word, they followed the cat as he padded through the snow-covered streets of Manchester. The town was quiet now, the festivities winding down, and the world felt suspended in a kind of stillness. Marmalade walked with purpose, his small paws leaving delicate prints in the fresh snow. He led them out of the town square, past the row of shops, and down a side street that Beth hadn't walked in years. Her heart began to pound as she realized where they were heading. Toward the old, abandoned church on the outskirts of town. The church had been closed for over a decade, its once beautiful stained glass windows now covered in grime, the steeple leaning slightly to one side. It had been a place of community and hope once, but now it was forgotten, a relic of a past that most of the town had moved on from. As they reached the churchyard, Marmalade stopped and turned to look at them, his green eyes glinting in the moonlight. He let out a soft, plaintive meow, a sound that seemed to echo in the cold night air. Then, without hesitation, he squeezed through a gap in the broken wooden door and disappeared inside. Beth hesitated, her breath visible in the frigid air. Why here? She murmured, her voice barely audible. Caleb put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Let's find out. They pushed open the creaky door and stepped into the dark, dusty interior of the church. The air was cold and thick with the scent of decay and abandonment. Moonlight filtered through the cracked windows, casting eerie shadows on the wooden pews. Marmalade, Caleb called softly, his voice echoing off the walls. A faint meow came from the far end of the church, near the altar. Slowly, they made their way down the aisle, their footsteps crunching on the debris scattered across the floor. When they reached the altar, they saw Marmalade sitting beside a small, tattered bundle of cloth. He pawed at it gently, then looked up at them as if urging them to come closer. Beth's heart was in her throat as she knelt down and carefully unwrapped the bundle. Inside, she found something that made her gasp. A small, framed photo, worn and faded but still recognizable. It was a picture of a young boy with bright eyes and a shy smile, holding a tiny orange kitten in his arms. "Adam," Beth whispered, tears streaming down her face. Caleb knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he reached for the photo. His eyes widened as he took in the image. "That's him," he said, his voice breaking. "That's the boy who used to come to the workshop with his mom. She brought him to visit Marmalade when he was just a kitten." I didn't realize." Beth looked at him, her brow furrowed. "You knew Adam?" Caleb nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know his name then. His mom was struggling. She came to me one day, asking if I could keep the cat for a while until she got back on her feet. She never came back, and I ended up keeping Marmalade. But I always wondered what happened to the boy. I didn't know he ended up with you." Beth's mind reeled as the pieces fell into place. Marmalade had been the bridge between Adam's fractured worlds. First with his struggling mother, then with Caleb, and finally with her and Jack. But when Adam was taken away, the cat had disappeared, as if he, too, had been lost in the shuffle of their broken lives. And yet, here he was. He had returned to this church year after year, as if waiting for them to find each other again. Beth's sobs broke the silence, and Caleb placed a comforting hand on her back. "Maybe this is what he was waiting for," Caleb said softly. "For us to understand. For us to remember him. Not just the boy, but the love he gave us." Beth nodded, her tears falling onto the photo. "He never forgot us," she whispered. "And neither did Marmalade." Marmalade let out a soft purr, curling up beside them as if to say, "It's all right now. You're together." For the first time in years, Beth and Caleb felt a sense of peace. Peace in knowing that Adam's memory had not been lost, and that Marmalade's journey had brought them back to the love they thought they had lost forever. The discovery in the old church changed everything. For Beth and Caleb, the photograph wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a bridge to healing, a reminder that the love they had shared with Adam still lived on, carried quietly by Marmalade's enduring loyalty. As the cat purred softly beside them in the dusty church, both Beth and Caleb felt the weight of years of unresolved grief begin to lift. "I think he brought us here for a reason," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion as he gently ran a hand over Marmalade's fur. Beth wiped her tears with the back of her glove, nodding. "It's like he's been holding on to this, waiting for us to find it and each other." For a long while, they sat together in the dim light of the church, sharing memories of Adam and filling in the gaps of their stories. Caleb spoke of how Adam had visited his workshop as a little boy, always shy but endlessly curious, especially about Marmalade. He remembered the way Adam's face would light up when he held the kitten, how he would giggle as Marmalade playfully pawed at his fingers. "He always seemed so happy when he was here," Caleb said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know he was going through so much at home." Beth shared her own memories of Adam. The way he would sit at the kitchen table for hours, drawing pictures of cats. How he had a knack for finding joy in the smallest things, even when the weight of his past was so heavy. She spoke of how his departure had shattered her and Jack, leaving them with an empty house and a sense of failure they never fully recovered from. "I used to think we didn't do enough for him," Beth admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "That maybe, if we'd been better, he would have been allowed to stay." Caleb shook his head firmly. "No, you gave him love, Beth. That's more than enough. That's what he would have carried with him." As they talked, Marmalade stretched out between them, his body warm and relaxed as if sensing that his mission was finally nearing completion. The next morning, Christmas Day, Beth and Caleb knew they couldn't keep their discovery to themselves. Marmalade's story, Adam's story, deserved to be told. Together, they carefully wrapped the photo and returned to the town square, where the community had gathered for the annual Christmas breakfast. The scene was festive and lively, the air filled with the smell of hot cocoa and the sound of laughter. But as Beth and Caleb approached the Christmas tree with Marmalade in tow, a hush fell over the crowd. "Isn't that the Christmas cat?" someone murmured. "He's here every year." Beth cleared her throat, her hands trembling as she held the photograph close to her chest. "There's something we need to share," she began, her voice wavering but steady. The townspeople gathered around as Beth and Caleb told the story of Marmalade and his extraordinary journey. They spoke of how the cat had connected their lives in ways they never could have imagined, and how he had waited year after year by the Christmas tree as if keeping vigil for the family they'd all lost. When Beth held up the photograph, the crowd gasped. The image of young Adam holding the tiny orange kitten was both heartwarming and heartbreaking, a reminder of the boy whose life had touched so many in such a short time. Tears streamed down faces as Beth finished the story, her voice breaking with emotion. "Marmalade didn't just belong to me or to Caleb or even to Adam," she said. "He belonged to all of us. He's a symbol of love, of resilience, of the connections that keep us going even when life feels too hard to bear." As Beth spoke, Marmalade curled up at the base of the tree, as he always did, his green eyes reflecting the twinkling lights above. The sight brought a wave of emotion over the crowd, and soon, one by one, people began to leave small tokens beneath the tree. A scarf, a tin of cat food, a bouquet of flowers, all offered in honor of the cat who had brought them together. Caleb, his voice gruff but warm, addressed the crowd. "This cat reminded us of what really matters. Not the gifts or the decorations, but the love we share. The kind of love that stays with us, even when the people we've lost are gone." By the time the story was finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the square. People hugged their loved ones a little tighter, their hearts filled with a renewed sense of gratitude for the bonds they shared. In the days that followed, Beth and Caleb grew closer, bound by their shared grief and the unexpected connection that Marmalade had given them. Caleb invited Beth to his workshop, showing her the intricate wooden toys he had spent years carving, and Beth invited Caleb to her kindergarten class, where he quickly became a favorite among the children. Together, they decided to honor Adam's memory in a tangible way. With the help of the community, they turned the old church into a sanctuary for stray and abandoned animals. Naming it Adam's Haven, Marmalade, of course, became its first resident and unofficial mascot, his story inspiring people from near and far to visit and adopt animals in need. Beth and Caleb found solace in their work, their once lonely lives now filled with purpose and companionship. Though the pain of their losses would never fully fade, they learned to carry it with grace, finding joy in the small, everyday moments and in the knowledge that they were keeping Adam's spirit alive. As the years passed, Marmalade continued to sit by the Christmas tree each December, though now he was no longer alone. The town had made it a tradition to gather by the tree on Christmas Eve, sharing stories of love and loss and leaving small offerings in honor of the cat who had brought them all together. For Beth and Caleb, Marmalade's presence was a reminder of the lessons he had taught them, that love endures, even in the face of unimaginable pain, and that sometimes the smallest, quietest creatures can leave the biggest impact on our lives. And as Marmalade purred contentedly in their laps each night, they knew that they had found something truly special: hope, healing, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. The years passed, and Manchester, Vermont, became known for more than its snowy Christmases and towering holiday tree. It became the town of Marmalade, the little orange tabby who had brought love, healing, and hope to an entire community. People traveled from far and wide to visit the tree and hear the story of the Christmas cat, and every year, Marmalade faithfully returned to his spot beneath the glowing pine, his green eyes watching over the town that had become his family. For Beth and Caleb, the seasons brought new beginnings. Their lives, once shadowed by grief, blossomed into something rich and full. Together, they ran Adam's Haven, caring for the animals who came through its doors with the same love and devotion they had once given to Adam and Marmalade. The sanctuary became a place where broken lives could mend, not just for the animals, but for the people who adopted them, many of whom were seeking solace of their own. Beth found herself laughing again, her house now warm and filled with life. Caleb, too, rediscovered joy in small moments: the laughter of the children at the sanctuary, the quiet satisfaction of Beth's companionship, and the soft purr of Marmalade resting on his lap. They often sat together by the fire, sharing stories and reflecting on how a single cat had changed everything. As Christmas approached each year, Beth and Caleb would walk hand in hand to the town square, where they joined the community in decorating the tree. Marmalade always came along, trailing behind them with his tail held high, as if leading the way. They would sit by the tree, their hearts full, and remember Adam, not with sadness, but with gratitude for the love he had brought into their lives. And as the Christmas lights sparkled overhead, Beth would sometimes whisper a quiet prayer, thanking the little boy who had taught her that love never truly leaves us, and the scruffy orange cat who had brought her back to it. In the end, Marmalade wasn't just a cat. He was a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. His story reminded everyone who heard it that no matter how lost we feel, there's always a way back to the light, and often, it's found in the places and the creatures we least expect. As the snow fell softly on Christmas Eve, Marmalade curled up beneath the tree one last time, his job complete. And somewhere, perhaps beneath a sky full of stars, Adam was smiling, knowing that his love and Marmalade's had left a legacy that would never be forgotten.